At a time when the colors red and blue have come to dominate the political process, those representing more purple areas are either seen as unicorns or unifiers. That's why many see today's guest, New York Congressman Mike Lawler, as parts of both, which is why in a state dominated by Democrat officeholders, this Republican stands out. And now more than ever, we all want to know how he's done it. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., it's 13th and Park.
The hard things that are necessary, we either do it or we'll pay the price down the road.
That often is missing in politics.
We have to solve everything.
It's a nightmare.
You and I can differ, but that doesn't mean you and I cannot be friends.
I have faith in the American people.
Those are the facts.
The Illuminati, right there. Aliens could have invaded and nothing would surprise me at this point.
We went from North Korea to M&M. That's a lot, man.
What's in this tea?
Well, Congressman, nice to have you on 13th and Park today. Let's go back before we go forwards. You were narrowly elected a couple of years ago against a sitting DCCC chair. It's the first time in maybe 4 decades that kind of person in that kind of position was not reelected. So I'm sure a lot of people have come to you off and on and said, Congressman, what is the secret sauce? How did you pull that off?
Well, it certainly obviously got some level of attention given that it hadn't happened in 40 plus years. I think, a district like mine, which has 80,000 more Democrats than Republicans that voted for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. To win in a district like that, you have to be able to attract independents and Democrats. I always have sought to build relationships, to reach across the aisle, to build the coalitions necessary to win, but more importantly, to do the job. We've closed nearly 6,500 individual constituent cases since I came to Congress, bringing back nearly $30 million in benefits that constituents are due from different federal agencies, from the VA to Social Security to the IRS, and really engaging with constituents. We're not going to agree on everything. As Ted Koch famously said, if you agree with me on 9 out of 12 things, vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 out of 12 things, go have your head examined. We're going to have debate. We're going to have disagreement, and that's okay. That's what makes our democracy work. That's why we have a constitutional republic.
Did you get a lot of that from your days in the Assembly? Obviously, to be a Republican in the New York Assembly, you got to be able to work across the aisle. You got to be able to deal with and talk with people coming from different points of view.
No question. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is that I was able to build consensus. I passed more bills than any member of my conference in the Assembly. And last Congress, I passed 11 bills through the House, 6 of which were signed into law by President Biden and passed by a Democratic Senate. You have to be able to build consensus and work across the aisle. Depending on your perspective, bipartisanship means, one side coming towards you. No, you have to find area of agreement. You have to be willing to give and take on both sides in order to build consensus. And that's something that I've always sought to do. It doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything. And there's going to be times where, Democrats are not going to like the way I vote on something. But the reality is, you have to be willing to engage in constructive dialogue and conversation. I was proud of the fact I was rated the 4th most bipartisan member of Congress, as well as the number 1 most effective freshman in the entire 118th Congress. And I didn't get that way by, being a hyper-partisan. I got that way by actually engaging in constructive dialogue.
You describe yourself as a common sense Republican, and I look at some of the tapes, so to speak, and it really tries you, right? Tries you or anybody out there in a very hyper-partisan, at times hyperbolic, environment that we lived in. I saw the wonderful exchange, if you want to call it that, with Representative Mannion on the floor. You had a bit of a raucous town hall meeting. And so my question is this: how do you gird yourself to stay true and focused to the mission you're on, to get things done? And yet, that what's swirling around you at times are some people that just kind of want to mix it up for the sake of doing just that to get attention.
Yeah. I'm Irish, Italian, Catholic from New York, so
That's a big blend.
Never shy,
right?
And I'm not going to back down, certainly, if somebody tries to come at me. But what I found kind of amazing about that whole exchange was I wasn't even talking to him. I was talking to another one of my colleagues, and he just started screaming at me from 4 rows back. projecting onto me, his frustrations. But the reality is that if you want to get things done, you have to be able to engage in a dialogue. And yes, sometimes it's going to be sharp. And yes, sharp elbows thrown and words exchanged. But you have to build consensus. Just yelling and screaming about Donald Trump is not actually going to address your concern.
Right.
You have to be willing to sit down and engage. And so where I agree with the president, I've said it. Where I disagree, I've said it. But I do so in a way that is constructive and actually going to address the issue. So, for instance, the World Trade Center Health Fund, which is critical to New York. And so many of my constituents who are law enforcement, firefighter, first responders, who have been dealing with 9/11 related illnesses. I just had a friend of mine pass away this week from 9/11 related illnesses. Yeah. It's devastating. But there were proposed cuts to that program, not intentionally, but because they didn't realize how the program was administered with some of the changes they were proposing to make. And we reached out and addressed it with the White House, with the administration, and got it fixed. But we did that by going to them directly and dealing with the situation. And it's the same way I've negotiated, for instance, to lift the cap on salt.
Yeah.
You can yell or you can go engage and figure out how to get a positive outcome.
You mentioned salt. Obviously, the House and the big, beautiful bill came out with a $40,000 increase in the cap. That was kind of an easy call, though, for you, Congressman, wasn't it? Given the district you represent, the part of New York you represent. I mean, how else do you get there? And coming out of Manhattan College, you were, focused on accounting and finance. So how does it all add up when this is all said and done, hopefully with a meaningful, increase in the SALT deduction?
The Senate came out with a $10,000 cap in their draft bill, and I immediately responded with the thumbs down and dead on arrival, because that's what it'll be. This was a hard-fought negotiation. It was a good faith negotiation with the Speaker, with the White House, to come to the $40,000 number with a $500,000 income cap and 1% growth over 10 years. And the objective is to provide middle-class tax relief. Now, what's middle class in my district, I understand, may not be middle class in somebody else's district. But the fact is, my constituents should not be penalized just because they live in a higher tax area where you have, a dense population.
Right.
You look at the issue of SALT, it was used as a pay for back in 2017 to pay for other provisions within the tax bill.
Right.
And there's a lot of good provisions, including doubling the standard deduction, which I fully support, increasing the child tax credit. But the $10,000 cap on SALT was arbitrary and capricious, and it hurt my constituents and it hurt New York. And so what we're trying to do is recognizing the need for a compromise, recognizing that you're not going to get everything you want out of a negotiation. It's got to be done in good faith. And so the cap on SALT would expire at the end of this year and it would go back to unlimited. But if we don't pass a tax bill, with it would come the alternative minimum tax. The standard deduction would be cut in half.
Right.
You would have a reduction of the child tax credit. So there's a lot of reasons why you have to negotiate and why unlimited SALT doesn't necessarily work in this construct. And so we fought and came to an agreement on 40,000. And I'm not going to accept anything less than that.
So let me take you to another part of the world, the Middle East.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
Where are you on that whole idea of the Middle East, which I think has changed dramatically? The president's trip, I think, showed how a lot of the politics, like Saudi Arabia and others in the Middle East, have changed in terms of what they are and what they represent, how they interact with the country, to try to bring it home so maybe one day get closer, if not to the reality of an Abraham Accord that can allow Israel not only to survive, but to live in peace.
Look, all of us want long-term peace and prosperity in the Middle East. And that requires normalization between Arab states and Israel. I think many of the Arab states, they want to live in peace. They don't want this conflict. They don't want continued death and destruction and terrorism. And so, I think as we look at these challenges, there's a few things that are important. Number one, as I said, there needs to be normalization. Number two, Iran must be contained and the threat from Iran and its proxies eliminated. That means ending the illicit oil trade between China and Iran, which has funded Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other terror proxies. It means Iran ending its nuclear weapons program, its ballistic missiles program. And, ultimately, if there is going to be regime change, that will have to come from within. That will have to come from the Iranian people.
Yep.
But I do think Iran has to understand we will not tolerate this continued terrorism. Iran has made it clear, both through its words and its deeds, that it wants to eradicate the state of Israel and eliminate the Jewish people, period. And we have to take that threat seriously. I fully support Israel and what they are doing to defend themselves proactively, especially in the aftermath of October 7th.
Yeah.
They cannot take the risk anymore. As Bibi Netanyahu said to me when I was there just a few weeks ago, either we fight or we die. And that is the choice that is before them.
Yeah.
And, it's hard for Americans or Europeans necessarily to fully understand that when they're not under constant threat of ballistic missiles. And remember, 700,000 Americans are dual Israeli citizens. It's one of the largest concentrations of Americans outside of America anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to recognize this isn't just about protecting Israelis, it's about protecting Americans.
So let me now bring you back across the pond, so to speak. Let's talk about New York, and specifically New York politics. For those who like history, there have been two Republicans who have been able to win the governor's chair in New York in the last 52 years. Of course, all of us know one of those two, George Pataki, who was a fabulously successful and I think popular governor. And the other, for the trivia people, was Malcolm Wilson, who was right before George Pataki. Is it possible for Republicans to dream of winning the governor's office in 26? They came relatively close with Lee Zeldin, not, in the last cycle. Is that doable?
I think so. I think New Yorkers are pragmatic. They're common sense. And they want change. They want people who are going to drill down on what the problems are, from the affordability crisis to the crime and public safety crisis, an education system that is failing. These are major issues that have to be dealt with. And I think if you present New Yorkers with a real vision and a plan, I think there's an opportunity there. There's no doubt it's difficult. Obviously, Republicans are significantly outnumbered.
Sure
but there's a lot of independents and a lot of conservative Democrats and disaffected Democrats and people who are just frustrated by what they've seen as a result of one-party rule. And I think, again, if you offer them a real vision of how to deal with the problems facing the state, I think people are open to it.
So let me go back to something a little bit more familial. Your dad, who faced ultimately a lot of struggles. He had financial struggles, I think, from a Ponzi scheme, loss of job, and then he had health struggles at the very end. How did that maybe change you as a person and steel you in your resolve to do what you're doing now? I know that one of the things you cite from what your dad told you very often was not only his belief in God, but in the need for a moral compass.
Well, the very last conversation I had with my dad before he died was, to whom much is given, much is required.
Right.
And you've been given a lot of skills and talents, and to use them to do God's work and always keep your moral compass about you. And that's something that has stuck with me as I've served in elected office, but, in the years since his passing, helped guide and shape me in my life and as a father and as a husband, and certainly in my capacity as an elected official.
It's nice when people in public life are open about themselves. You were very open about sharing what you and your wife went through and what led to a miscarriage, the first attempt at starting a family. You're very open and declarative about it. I want you to know how much that impacted so many others who were going down the same path and were facing the same challenges, same fears. I hope you both understand how impactful sharing that really was.
I appreciate that. And, certainly, it's never easy talking about personal experiences. I know for my wife, that was extremely difficult. It still is when you talk about it, because the reality is it's a loss that you experience, and it's something you never forget.
So I can't leave this interview without asking you the most difficult question. Are you a Mets fan or a Yankees fan? Are you a Giants fan or a Jets fan? I mean, you have to kind of choose up sometimes, Congressman.
These are easy. These are softballs. I'm a Yankees fan. I was a vendor at Yankee Stadium when I was in college. I've been a lifelong Yankees fan. I'm a Giants fan and a New York Rangers fan. I like to win. But the 1994 Stanley Cup playoff run was my favorite sports championship ever. Mark Messier was my childhood idol. You know, I watched every game with my dad and my brother, and I still remember that very fondly when they won the cup.
Those are the moments that make for lifetime memories and for retelling those stories. Thank God for sports. Well, Congressman, I appreciate your time. Also, I want you to know it's nice. Every time I've seen you on the air, you've been very forthright. You kind of put it out there. You tell it kind of like it is. And not everyone has to agree with you. The most important thing, though, is they know where you're coming from. And I think more than ever, we need more of that in public service.
I appreciate it. Nobody will ever have to wonder where I stand on an issue. That's for sure.
You take care of yourself.
Thank you.